cut to 3 straight minutes of me just stroking my hair. And we are live here to chat about Only Murders in the Building Season 5. I'm so
Yay.
pumped. I'm so excited. Suffice it to say, as we've been over many times before, this show was actually created specifically for us. This was cooked up in a lab by Selena Gomez with us in mind, and we're really deeply appreciative of that. So we are here to chat about it. Now, important logistic fact in terms of like timing. This is live, but if you're watching it recorded later, we are recording this essentially right before the finale drops. So we're not going to have spoilers for the finale, but we're going to talk about the whole season other than the finale. And then we'll come back later in November and also chat about the finale plus other stuff. Okay, great. I'm here with Kate and Carey, the other two in my murderous trio. Kate and Carey, how have you been over our summer hiatus? And do you bring me any news?
I've been good. I guess the news I bring is just there is a slew of period dramas in the works. We're all excited about that. Specifically, Miss Scarlet is coming back very soon. I think it's in January. That looks great. And there's a bunch of Austen productions going on for better or for worse. I don't think we've actually, I think it's got started filming since we've talked. So there is a Netflix production of Pride and Prejudice going on, and I think there's a Focus Features production of Sense and Sensibility. And Focus Features did the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. So I have higher hopes for that one, and I am sitting on pins and needles. Whether love it or hate it, I will be seated front row for the Pride and Prejudice when that one comes out.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be watching all of the above. And
Mm-hmm.
one of those is going to be for better, and one of those is going to be for worse. And it's just going to be a matter of figuring out which is which.
Yeah.
Oh, that's well. I've been doing well enough. It's Wednesday, it's closer to Friday, so that's always a good thing. Homecoming is on Saturday. Looking forward to that. The only news that I do bring is sort of like news that is like of the unnews variety. So, Adam Driver reported, I guess, during an interview that he and Steven Soderbergh had these plans, like far down the line plans, like this was the thing that they wanted to do, wanted to make happen for a freaking Star Wars movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucasfilm was on board and they were ready to go with it. And the big bad evil empire in Disney, apparently, according to Adam Driver, says, no thanks, we'll probably not do that. And for the wildest reason, at least as far as Adam Driver reported, basically saying that they didn't see a way that Kylo Ren would still be alive. We're talking about a franchise that has brought people back from the dead as narrative devices in almost every form and every fashion that you could possibly imagine, but they just could not see a way that Kylo Ren would still be alive. I call BS on that, but we could have had a Steven Soderbergh Star Wars movie, and it looks like we're not. And for the stupidest reason that I could possibly imagine, and it could possibly happen, but deep breaths, deep breaths. But that is the only bit of news that I bring, and it's disappointing.
It's incredibly disappointing. And my initial reaction to that was obviously like rage. Like, this is completely senseless for them to not pursue this. The timing of when this would have occurred would have been, kind of perfectly set following the conclusion of the trio of movies that came out. This would be perfect timing for Adam Driver's career. He's still like available and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, Star Wars and most franchises like it have brought back people that have been blown to bits, or like if there's a will, there's a way, right?
Mhm.
As evidenced by Palpatine in the most recent, the end of the trilogy. However, the one like silver lining for me that was really interesting once I kind of got past the like, this is the dumbest thing ever, and I'm gonna find a way to blame misogyny, which I can if anyone's interested. Once I got past that, I was like, I'm at least seeing such a positive fan reaction of not necessarily positive that anybody's happy, like everybody's enraged, but everybody wanted more of this. And at the time, and Kate and Carey as well, probably both of you remember this, at the time of the end of the last Skywalker trilogy, where, especially given how it ended, where we had been saying all along, have you ever watched a Disney movie before? This is going to end with like Rey and Kylo kind of being the heart of it. Sorry if you didn't like that. You were like very clearly told in the first movie. But anyways, at that time, that felt like, I guess, like a little bit of an unpopular opinion. Everybody was split a little bit 50-50, but it kind of felt a little like 40-60, and everybody was like, boo, Kylo's, like all that kind of stuff, right? People hated Rey and Kylo in some overlapping degree. And now, as folks have had time to sit with it a little bit more and maybe get past the, like, I don't know, emotions of it, people are more willing and, in fact, eager to see Kylo's story continue. Now, I'm going to set aside the entire, like, little diatribe I can go on about how, like, a lot of the Kylo Ren stuff is actually rooted in misogyny, even though he's male. But we can cross that bridge if the Hunt for Ben Solo ever ends up getting made, which it could. Hope springs eternal for Palpatine, at least. But setting that aside, it was just nice to see, like, oh, you guys did come around to this and to Rey and to most of Taylor Swift's albums. So some of specific misogyny is short-lived, even though, like, the eternal systemic misogyny is not short-lived.
That's interesting, right? Because my thought was, looking from a distance, my thought was that people were upset about this for two reasons. First of all, they would have wanted a Kylo Ren Ben Solo movie, right? Whether it was a standalone or whether it was part of another trilogy or whatever. But then there's also, and maybe this is sort of what you meant, but I'm also feeling like maybe there are people who would have wanted that, preferred that instead of what we're probably going to get in the form of a few more movies focused on Ray.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can do both. I don't think that they have to be incredibly interconnected, but I think there were probably people, at least as far as I'm concerned, who sort of felt like they would have preferred Ben Solo stories as opposed to no Ray stories, right? So that's sort of the sentiment, the feedback that I was feeling.
I'm okay. I hear you, and to an extent, you're right. However, and this is going to touch on the idea of, like, being anti Kylo is a little bit misogynistic, and I'll kind of explain. It's not necessarily that, like, think of, like, the part of any given fandom that is, like, we'll say, like, pretty openly misogynistic, right? They're like, boo, girls, this is woke, this is stupid. It generally tends to overlap, like, misogyny, racism, etc., and they're kind of, like, fairly obvious about it. We're talking about those people. Those folks actually don't mind seeing women on screen. They mind seeing women happy. So, if you think of a world in which Kylo's dead, blah, 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 and Rey's story continues and she's miserable and constantly fighting and constantly, whatever, and she is in no way happy and is not in any kind of pursuit of happiness, to an extent, people are okay with that. If you take, for example, like Miss Scarlet and the Duke, right? The show did not become inherently more feminist with the absence of a male love interest for her. We're not inherently, like, we're celebrating Eliza more because the Duke is gone. The Duke had to be gone, and also they had to celebrate Eliza, and also they had to make her happy. So in a Star Wars universe where Rey is there, but she's, like, miserable and fighting all the time, and there's, like, nothing for her, that's kind of what, like, a misogynistic part of the audience would still want. They don't like what makes female viewers happy. They don't like what makes female characters happy, but that doesn't mean they don't want a woman on screen. They just want her, like, half naked and miserable.
Put the tea down.
um,
You need a microphone so you can drop it there.
it's built into the laptop. That's kind of my take on it. But, we'll see what happens if it actually eventually gets potentially, like, any kind of traction from the fan response. Like a maybe not, probably not, but we'll see. I think somebody was saying that's kind of what happened with Deadpool. Like, Deadpool, I don't
Yeah.
fully remember exactly what that situation was, but I'm sure there's been cases where fans were like, "Oh my god, we actually do want this. Take our money."
Mhm.
We'll see if Disney wants it. Okay, speaking of franchises that want our money, my bit of news is Wicked is coming. Wicked 2, if you have somehow missed the most expensive promotional campaign of all time, it has even showed up in shows that I watch, including but not limited to Dancing with the Stars, which just got done with a Wicked night, which was phenomenal, and Project Runway, which had as I think their penultimate episode a like Wicked week with the Wicked costume designer, whatever. Fantastic, 10 out of 10. Can't wait. I already have 3 different showings booked for opening weekend. So excited. That's all. Just in case I'm breaking the news to y'all.
Okay.
So with that, let's turn to the one, the only Murders in the Building season 5. I'm so excited to talk about this. Again, we'll talk through all the spoilers, but first, let me just start with like a super general question so we can start getting some thoughts out. So, with this season, we've returned to the Arconia and we're investigating a familiar character's death, Lester. So, my question for you is, did this season have sort of a classic Only Murders in the Building feel to you, and did it work?
Hmm. I have been trying to like figure out what specifically it is and pinpoint down exactly what it is, but there is something that's off this season. And I've tried to like figure out the tone that's off or whatever. Not necessarily in a bad way. It is just it feels different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had thoughts of like, they haven't pulled out quite as much stunt casting this season, and that was kind of just like a recursive bit that they would always do. I think there's a lot less physical comedy this season, I feel like. And I think those are more just like what it's missing, but I do actually feel like it's moved in a direction that we can all appreciate, which is we all are here far more because we really like the character development and the like connections that they draw between. And I do actually feel like this season had the most cohesive, most like connected to the plot and reasonable story or character development for our main trio, both with how it connected with each other and how it connected with their own personal life, their own personal history, and the story at large. And I do think that in doing that, it's made the whole thing feel more cohesive, at least in like the protagonist side. I don't feel the same way about the antagonist side, but in the protagonist side, and part of that makes it actually feel a little more streamlined. There is some like charm of the show is how like chaotic it can get, and it has lost a little bit of the chaos because of the cohesion. And I think that's the thing that I'm feeling is it's not as chaotic as it's been.
Mm.
So, thinking about that, I have a question on at least. So, going into the seasons before, have they always known when they've started shooting that they were going to have another season? I don't know if that's always been the case. It may very well have. But the reason that I ask is because to a degree in season 5 there are some things that you can do with your characters because you're comfortable with them, the audience is comfortable with them, so you can sit with them a little bit more. You can do some things with them in season 5 that you wouldn't have done in seasons obviously 1, 2, or 3. And so that sort of, I don't know if slows things down is sort of what I'm looking at, but I feel like you can sort of pace things differently if you don't feel quote unquote a pressure to have to go huge or big or whatever the case may be because you're thinking about, okay, we have to press for the next season. And so if you know that ahead of time, you can do some things narratively that you probably wouldn't have done if you're thinking about, okay, we have to make sure that we engage folks, we have to make sure that we generate some buzz and make sure that we can continue this. And so when you already know that, you can take some different choices narratively with characters. You can sit with them a little bit. You can sort of build on some of the histories that they have in terms of their personal relationships,
Mm-hmm.
um, with each other, sort of the goals and things that they sort of want to do, and just sort of natural growth. So you have time to sit with those. And so if you ask me if this feels like a sort of a quote unquote sort of like classical sort of season of Only Murders in the Building, I feel like it does in that it's taken an opportunity to sort of feel like it's grown a little bit and have sort of room and space to tell um, different kind of narrative stories. So in that respect, yes, it and to your point, Kate, it doesn't have sort of the chaos that we might have seen earlier because I don't know that they felt like they had to do that this season.
It's like
Yeah.
they saved a lot of time by not necessarily world building. They are doing little minuscule world changing. And they're, they didn't, I'm not going to say they didn't introduce a lot of new characters, but they didn't flesh out a lot of new characters, which is not necessarily a criticism, but they didn't waste a lot of time on side characters either. They allowed who they had already kind of worked with in the first four seasons to kind of shine and grow, and didn't use too rapid or too chaotic of character development with them.
Yeah. I think the things that are catching me is like there is a bit of a tone shift or an energy shift, but it still is great, and I think it still has a lot of the things that we all really like about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's just it's not pulling out all the works necessarily as it used to do to get like clicks and attention. It's not doing as much stunt casting. It's not doing as much like um of the bits that are like really get you hooked, and they're far more leaning into like every previous season. It's always felt like one of the main trio kind of didn't get any growth. They kind of were just there to be a vehicle for the other two and the story. And I do feel like this season's one of the ones that has had the most even spread of character growth between the main three that connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right that it they couldn't have done that in the first few seasons, but they had an opportunity to kind of return to base a little bit with this one. I think because like the last two seasons, they had to go in the building,
Mm-hmm.
but let's get out of the building because
Right.
yeah. So I think this is a return to base that was justified. That now we have a little bit of like distance. We come back to it actually happening in the building
Mm-hmm.
and revealing more of the building itself. The building is its character, and now it has a casino, and that's an interesting little twist. But bringing it back to home has really let them settle in with these characters that we already know and love,
Mm-hmm.
but peel back a layer that we've never been able to see and build on something like all of them are building on things that we've already established about like Oliver's narcissism, Charles' insecurity, Mabel's trying to figure out her path in life, and it's all building on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
but in a far like more natural and I think organic way than we have seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. There is something that felt very natural about this season, both the kind of chemistry between the trio. It didn't, they never felt like they were trying that hard, but obviously in early seasons, there's a lot of, it's acting and, excellent acting work. Um, but as it's progressed, it certainly felt a lot more natural. The comedy flows a
Mm-hmm.
lot more naturally. The physical comedy flows a lot more naturally. But we do have, and Kate, you were alluding to this, folks who have not been here since season one. We encounter some different villains, potential villains, antagonists, etc. And I conceptualize them all as kind of like New York City elite archetypes. So you've got the mob, the super rich, the embodied AI, the folks who are in AI psychosis, divorced housewives, and musicians. So naturally, villains. Who's stealing the show for you? Who's working and not working in terms of the antagonists slash theorized antagonists?
You can go first
Can I
this time.
say this? I, it, I can tell you what I wouldn't say it's not working now, but I will tell you what didn't work for me sort of right away.
Okay.
Um, the sort of spark or relationship or whatever you want to call it between Mabel and Jay that was sort of starting um, from where it started. My first thought was, "Good Lord, I can't believe that she's even considering for 30 seconds the possibility of any sort of serious or significant relationship with this J dude. I'm like, what are we doing here? We've seen this before, and why would you even consider it? So I'm actually cool with where it wound up, but seeing it sort of episode by episode, I'm like, what are we doing here? And I also felt the same way to a degree about Charles because
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's no the dude. I know how this works, right? If you're sort of like trying to get back into the dating scene or whatever you want to call it, and so it's obviously changed a whole lot. Um, but it felt like too much, at least initially, the
Mm-hmm.
sort of dating apps and that sort of thing. It felt like they were playing that way too much for comedic purposes
Mm-hmm.
than anything else. Now, again, episode to episode, where it sort of wound up and the revelations that came from that um, were meaningful, right? And I guess it's one of those things where you sort of have to trust the writers and the actors that they're going to get somewhere with something you may find frustrating, but in the very beginning, I'm like, why is it? It just felt a whole lot of slapstick, and I didn't know that I appreciated it right away, but it got there. So that's sort of what I did not appreciate, at least in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as like whether it's protagonist or antagonist, what's sort of working for me, um, again, and I know we sort of talk about how um, and sort of, and I think Kate may have mentioned this. I don't know if it was online or offline, but sort of the narrative devices that you can sort of expect from this show in terms of telling the story from certain different perspectives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have the episode when you get the story told essentially from Lester Bot's point of view, I didn't necessarily know if I was going to appreciate that, but what I did like was sort of seeing the history, at least the early history of this show. I guess it's sort of an easier way of doing sort of a clip show because you see these characters from when they actually form their friendship together, like sort of right before that, and sort of to the point that they did.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just sort of a nice sort of way to remember how these characters have grown and sort of become family, and just out of happenstance that happened, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it could have easily been that none of this ever happened. And so those sort of moments of interconnectivity and sort of seeing that sort of reminded me why I like the show. And that was sort of worked what one of the things that worked for me. I'm pretty sure there are others, but that sort of stood out to me.
Kate, what about you?
Yeah, yeah. We've talked before about like the romance in this show, and I think weirdly, the and I think the writers know this. The only successful feeling one, the only one that's felt truly okay, was the Oliver and Loretta, and I bet part of that has to do with whatever's happening behind the scenes.
Sure.
Um, and it is Meryl Streep. You're gonna keep her around, even though I'm sure she's probably the most expensive actor they have on that
Oh, for
set.
sure.
Understand why you guys are having her there. But, Charles, like, that's his running bit. And it's kind of like, oh, yeah, Charles, goes off with the most dangerous, obviously villainous woman in the room. And it's not even like sexy, alluring villainous. It is very much like obviously not even kind of subtle. It is cartoonishly villain,
Mm-hmm.
and he loves those women. And it is funny now in retrospect, the revelation of like why he does this. But you're right. The romances always kind of feel a little hollow, a little vague. And I agree that I was really worried they were going to do the same thing with Mabel, especially where she was talking to Detective Williams, and Detective Williams even starts to go, "Girl, what are you doing? Absolutely not." And she actually then comes around on Mabel's side, and it's Mabel's decision later kind of points at like, I could go to the Maldives with you, or I could be sitting here with an actual community of people I built around myself, mourning this thing that's kind of at the center of our relationship. But it is also a moment of like, this might be the end of a lot of our connections. A lot of these people I know, this might be the last time I see them.
Mhm.
And it is just, it is an interesting thing that they've done such a good job of building out these like familial bonds, but really weakened relationships. And I do think that's fed into sometimes with their villains or their antagonists. If they introduce you for a season, you either get really well introduced or really poorly introduced, and they always kind of do poorly with their romances.
Mhm.
And normally they do pretty well with their antagonists.
Mhm.
I don't feel like they've done a really good job with at least like the three archetypal billionaires. We did get a little bit more with Camille in the one of the more recent episodes, but weirdly it was actually with Loretta and not with the main trio, which is an out of the norm connection. Um, I think Jay and whatever the other guy's name is very underdeveloped, and maybe that's pointing to the fact that they're probably not connected, and they were the most massive red herring to exist. Um, the other villains, I do think the robot's an interesting villain. I think in a modern conversation about, like you were saying, the AI psychosis and the AI revolution, I have an interesting like perspective on that as a engineer, very connected to that, obviously. But it is it is a palpable and real thing, even if it's played for laughs in this setting. And I do think that is done really well because you can see like the raw edge of both of like how we feel about it right now in the real world, but also how it's affecting the story and the people that are experiencing it. Um, so I don't think like all of the archetype or the antagonists were bad, but I do think it was one of their weaker seasons. Um, Especially like when you're looking at the divorced mob wife and like the family around her. The boys, it was a funny bit once or twice, but it's tiring now.
Mhm.
It's
The
annoying.
grandma,
Completely
I
agree.
think I think you didn't necessarily need to develop her to have her be the twist at the like at the end of the most recent episode,
Mhm.
but we needed to have seen her at least one more time for it to have felt like a satisfying twist because I completely forgot she existed until that. I mean, she was in one episode, I think like episode 2 or 3, and now she's finally back. That's not great.
When when I saw that, I said, because like when they were obviously making this whole like aha moment, and then they show her, and I'm like, who the hell is that?
Well,
Um,
I and I
I
will
swear to God,
say,
I had no idea.
yeah, I will say they don't. So if you get into the weeds about this as much as I do sometimes, they don't tend to every season do like slightly different card titles. They
Mhm.
normally it's just the same thing every year. This year that's not the case. This year they did change something with like Howard walking past. Now he was
I saw
walking with the
that.
robot. And then at the beginning of this episode, he wasn't with the robot. He was with some lady in the little vehicle. And
Yep.
I noticed that
Yep.
and I went, interesting. And so I was a little on radar about like, what is this about? They've definitely done this intentionally. What is this about? But I couldn't remember this lady at all. Of now that she's been pointed out, I vaguely remember her doing something kind of silly in that one episode at the mob house, but that was it. And for as much as like you don't have to develop her, like give her a whole backstory, have her be like this like silent, mysterious figure that just keeps popping up every once in a while. You're like, hey, okay, sorry.
She could have easily been the person who was basically always yelling at the boys who were being annoying to freaking
Mhm.
shape up. If you do that episode here and an episode there and integrate her that way, that solves your problem.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to juggle, and I completely agree with you. I think they wanted to really maximize. They're not having to spend time reintroducing us to the environment of the Arconia. In fact, we're supposed to be believing that the Arconia is about to get renovated into a casino. They're not having to reintroduce us to our trio, and in fact, the profile of time that they've spent on Charles's romance and Mabel's romance is not huge. So they have a lot to work with. We start the season with Lester already dead, and we have a full season order. They also know that, to Carey's point earlier, they know that they're not having to end the series this season because they know they have another season. So that alone gives you some breathing room towards the end of the season as well. So I think what they decided to do was let's throw a bunch of side characters in here to some extent, maybe to see what sticks. And that's where we get Beanie's Thea and we get the mob boys, who I agree that doesn't work at all. That got really hokey really fast. And frankly, I'm not sure we needed that many of them. I'm like, that kind of could have been a Three Stooges thing. I don't know. There was a lot there.
I almost feel like if they had leaned more into Three Stooges, they could have given them more distinct personalities, and like they
Yes.
each have their own silly thing.
Right.
And I think there's, there is that joke about like the podcast bros, and like that's what they were leaning into.
Sure.
But there are, for as much as like, whatever, there are a handful of like podcast bros that are like genuinely like goofy but golden retriever Kronk energy that is funny and approachable, that I think they really could have leaned into more. One, to throw you off the scent of again like them being mobsters, but also like have a little bit more personality and stop it from being like a hokey joke about mom made me nachos, I do, however, think there is a few side characters that they introduced that are okay. Like the Thea thing, I don't know if she's well developed, but I do think she did a really great job of like adding to to Mabel's story. I also think the Rainey, the widow, was a great character. So
Yes.
I didn't feel much about her till very recently, but the scene where she's smoking with Mabel, really, like I had this distinct thought of she's one of the most real characters in this show that we've had in a long time, because I could feel the connection of like she is deeply grieving. She has this thing that she connects very deeply with her husband, but then also she cares about other things than just her husband. She cares about this girl she saw grow up in the Arconia, the place where her husband works. She has a connection with Mabel. We may have never seen it before, but you can see in her concern about Mabel and her romance with Jay, this kind of like not maternal, not grandmotherly, all with the fully, but there is like an aunt, like I've seen you grow up. I have opinions. I want all the best for you, and it did a great job of making her a character who has been kind of background, kind of a secondary character. All of a sudden, it jutted right into like, this is a character who has been here all along. Now we feel her, and she is real. And it flushed her out very quickly. Like it was kind of a bit until like that scene, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I love you. You were so well done.
And she was present in the flashbacks as well, briefly, but present in Lester's flashback. So it allows us to see her in the flashback, probably around the age that Mabel is now, maybe a bit younger. And at that point, she had some, sense of self. And we see that present day, she also has a sense of self, even during a time of immense grieving. And I think that plays in well to Mabel's current storyline, where she's having a bit of self-doubt that's not attached to one specific life stage. We see at the beginning of the season, she's telling Oliver and Charles, I'm actually doing pretty good. I've, finally got housing, and I've, finally got something in terms of like life and career and so on. And so we've seen Mabel go through sort of young adult life crises that have something specific: career, housing, her romantic season, so on. And she still has some of those that she's growing towards or working on, but she's not having a specific, like a romantic crisis or a housing crisis. Right now, she's having some self-doubt. And it's interesting seeing that echoed also in Charles and Oliver. There's something kind of like, oh, that's unsettling to see, that never goes away. And it's also comforting to see that never goes away, where Charles is doubting, like, wait, why am I attracted to all the most evil women in the world? And Oliver is like, I'm so happy that I married the best woman in the world, but also I'm realizing I kind of don't know her entirely, but like, and it's not in a way where he's essentially doubting his marriage, but just sort of like, wait, my feet are still not underneath me, even at my big age. And Mabel is like, my feet are still not underneath me at my big age. What do you think of that? This sort of like the more abstract identity questioning that they have going on right now?
I think they've always done an interesting job about balancing it, but I think this season is the most honed and clearly focused about what they're doing, even if it is kind of more about like there's sporadic things of leading to these feelings in each person.
Mm-hmm.
Like Oliver's insecurity or like desperation and narcissism has always been more like it's always been kind of loose and vague, and now all of a sudden we have a tangible reason for a handful of the ways he feels. He's always going to be a narcissist. That's like that is his thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a certain level of everybody can understand that like he's in love with this woman, but he's realizing he doesn't know her like he thought he did, and
Mm-hmm.
that's an upsetting thing. That's an unsettling thing, and dealing with like the process of he's the one considering moving the longest and kind of deciding whether he's up for and interested in like uprooting his life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then with Charles, you're right. It's like, at the big old age that he's at, he should, the stereotype is you should have it all figured out. You should know like all your faults and you should be able to like compensate for them. But that's not the case all the time. And it's interesting to see, the bit of him basically having to come to grapples with why do I love these women, and why is it that thing? And I think with him specifically, then it grows out more into like why does he push people away? And I don't say it quite as clearly as that, but that's also a thing he's always done, is push people away when things get uncomfortable. And so in one of the more recent episodes he does that, and it's only like once he's confronted with it that he has to challenge that and really come to face with it. And then with Mabel has kind of always been the stability one of their trio, but she's in the life stages where she's supposed to be the one that's allowed to experiment a little bit more, allowed to like slip and fall before she gets back up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that she's kind of feeling the pressure of like she made the mistake. She's the one that, said, yeah, we'll sign this thing because of her own self-doubt. And I
Mm-hmm.
think she's grappling with like I just secured this thing that I've always wanted, this security of like all those things. And she kind of just in 1, 2, 3 signed away it all and lost a lot that she had grown for. And yet I think of all of the seasons, for like they all have, I think more than any other season, so much riding on the line right now. But they all are going into this final episode feeling a lot more like they also have this weird feeling of like confidence,
Mm-hmm.
like even within like self-doubt, even in or confidence even in self-doubt. Like
Mm-hmm.
they we're feeling hopeless about solving the case, and not because of like there was a weird feeling of it's not necessarily them blaming themselves, but
Mm-hmm.
more of like darn, like we ran out of time, we were going to have gotten this, we would have gotten this, we just don't have enough time, there's not enough evidence yet. And I think in an earlier season, if they were on this time crunch, they would have been more like, why did we think we could have done this? There's no way we could have solved this. And they're not saying it like that. They are definitely saying it like we could have solved this if we had more time.
Mm-hmm.
And darn, we just lost it. And then of course they have a thread that they are now going to pull in the last hour, and they are doing it with such confidence that they did not have before.
Mm-hmm. I think
Yeah.
there's this like confidence, age, and wisdom that they're like close to accessing and then sometimes can't access depending on the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ditto. What I will say is what I will say is it's sort of like probably what we all sort of deal with, right? It's like we may not always know what the answer or the solution is, right? But there is a level of power or confidence or at least satisfaction when you know what the issue is, what the problem is, right? Because it's like if you're dealing with something and you have no idea how you get it, and I sort of equate it to like the easiest way to equate it is to sort of like a medical experience, right? And so if you're dealing with something that's ailing you, and you don't know what it is, it could be anything, and it's horrible to think about, right? But as soon as someone tells you, okay, this is what it is, at least you know what it is, and it's like, okay, we can figure out a way to address it. And so there's a confidence, I guess is the word, but there's something that comes from knowing that, and that's what these characters have sort of gotten to a point. It's like, okay, we know what our weaknesses are, if you want to call them that. And now it's like, okay, at least I know what that is, and we can deal with that. So I think that's where these characters are, and that's a good place to be. Even if you don't know where you're going to wind up, at least you know that you need to do something about it.
It's kind of reflected on their outsides. Behind the scenes, I know we've been talking about like, we love the wardrobe, specifically Mabel's wardrobe this
Mhm.
season. They're kind of starting to dress better, but then you also have these moments, and I'm not criticizing what Mabel is wearing. You have moments like in the most recent episode where she's in this like kind of stripy sweater, but like black and white track pants. And the sweater is like a button down over another sweater that doesn't really match. And each individual piece is lovely, but put all together, it's sort of like harkening back to a slightly more disheveled or like occasionally even unflattering style that she had in earlier seasons, which I'm not judging. That was kind of part of her progression. And then you contrast that to some of the outfits she's worn where I'm like, oh my God, I love this. Looks fantastic. It's like tailored, but also relaxed. It looks nice on her and it's clean and it's classic, but also has like some quirky youth to it, whatever. Like you're seeing that where it's like, okay, they're approaching, and the same for Charles and Oliver, where they're having some moments where they're really coming across like a little more put together. They're dressed in a way that's more flattering to them and their age. And, with Oliver, obviously, there's sort of this like
Yeah,
quirky, theater
I was
guy
gonna say
thing.
I'm thinking about the Linda Laughing boots, and what are we doing? So, uh,
Oliver has his kind of shtick. So, but even then, like we've seen sometimes slightly like softer or more subtle colors on him. We've seen jackets that fit him a little better. With Charles, we've definitely seen a difference in how he's dressed this season. Some sharper collars, some more relaxed looks. He looks a little bit less like a fish out of water in certain scenes, but not always. Same for Mabel with the like, oh, here's some fantastic looks. And then like, here's this random thing that looks like you just put on whatever was on your bedroom floor. Cause some days we do put on whatever's on our bedroom floor. And I think
Mhm.
that kind of shows their internal progression where they're accessing, a little bit more maturity, a little bit more like self presence and identity. And then some
Mhm.
days it's like mismatched, whatever, because that's how they're feeling.
Yeah. Well, and I also think specifically the outfits I've really loved from Mabel this season, but almost all of her outfits this season have been sets of like, same print pants and shirts, or like they're like the vest and slacks, and they're matching.
Yeah.
And like the red one in like one of the early episodes, that one's the one that really caught my eye and made me think about this. Um and I agree that like Charles seems like he's dressing a little more comfortable. He's not like dressing down, but he's definitely more in like sweaters and like softer fabrics rather than like button ups and slacks every day. And then I agree that like Oliver's is still hokey and like it's Oliver, but there is a bit more of like it's mellowed out a bit more. It
Mhm.
blends a bit more.
Mhm.
Um, and unless they're calling attention to it. I think there is also something to be said about like this most recent episode where they're all dressed down, probably the most we've ever seen them. And I do think that it is an internal struggle of like what they've been going through, but also there is a part of it that's just kind of the indicative of we're all moving and we don't want to, and like this is my moving clothes, this is my packing clothes.
Mhm.
And there is a level of, you know, they all kind of, whatever guard that they all, whatever walls they still had up with each other, they all just kind of go, yeah, let's put them down. Let's all just be really honest and emotionally vulnerable with each other in this moment. And it takes like Charles a little bit longer to get there as per usual.
Mhm.
But in the end of the episode, they all kind of have this moment of like, this is sad. This is something I do not want. I am resistant to this. And I am not ready to let this go, and I'm coping with it in the ways that I am. And I do think like part of that is the wardrobe. I think when Oliver opened up the door and he was wearing like a normal dude outfit instead of his, over the top clothes that he tends to wear, just like a non-buttoned shirt. I noticed because of how, typical it was. Add in the fact that in cut in between these episodes, there's the ad for them, and it's those two actors, and like they dress very differently in the ads, so it's funny.
mhm.
Um, but I do agree that like there is something to be said about they are very much leaning into the visual storytelling of clothes and how that represents them both in like what they're doing in the stage of life that they're at that current second, but also their internal confidence. I
Mhm.
agree that there is a mellowing of Oliver, like a softerness of Charles, and a confidence in Mabel that we definitely would not have seen earlier.
Yeah. And for at least two of the characters, I sort of feel like there's certainty in universe reasons for their style, right? I mean, obviously with Mabel coming off of the Hollywood experience, and hanging around with, and I forget the character that I guess she was sort of playing herself,
Eva Longoria.
but Eva Longoria, right? And so that interaction, that experience, that certainly in universe had an impact on the confidence that she has, on what she
Mhm.
wears, and how she presents herself. As far as Charles, in terms of he's obviously in a stage where he's looking for a relationship. And so in that sort of situation, you can either go one of two ways. You can either decide that you want to sort of dress yourself or present yourself in sort of a way that you feel is going to attract other people that may not necessarily be who you are, or if you're legitimately trying to get in a relationship, trying to attract someone who's going to sort of be with you, you need to sort of be who you are, right? And it sort of feels like his his um wardrobe started to reflect more of who he is, who's Charles, not necessarily Brazos, right, in front of the camera. And so I think you started to see that a little bit more. As for Oliver, I think um, it was more, at least in terms of how he presented, it was sort of this more contemplative sort of person in terms of looking at the prospect of moving out of this place, letting this place go. And he's probably a little bit depressed. I don't know, but
Mhm.
I think his wardrobe started to reflect that. I mean, as I guess as less flamboyant as he could possibly be, but I
Mhm.
think his wardrobe sort of mirrored that sort of feeling also.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's so interesting how they use, different shows will use different things. For some, it's kind of the soundtrack. And for this show, it's not the soundtrack. And for some, it's the lighting or the setting. And sometimes, the show will dabble in that. But the portrayal, the fashion on these characters, I think has been so intentional and aligned throughout each season. Now, I know
Mm.
we're short on time. I still have two questions that I want to get through at lightning speed. So we're going to have to do lightning rounds on them. One of them is what endgame do you want for these characters? And one of them is who is your woman of the week? So we're going to have to do like quickie 1 minute lightning rounds. And we will start with what endgame do you want for these characters? What do you want to see in the next episode? And kind of as we go from here in season 6, knowing what you know from season 5. I'll go first. I want some romance. I love the Oliver Meryl Streep situation. Oliver and Loretta, 10 out of 10. I do think Charles deserves romance, and I would like for it to not be like a hokey plot point of him just getting got by a villainess again. Now, it can be somebody who has some edge. It can be somebody that has echoes of that, somebody who has like either a gray side or just comes across as like, kind of villainessy. But I would like for Charles to get like a real romance of some kind. Doesn't have to like last. I just think the storyline would be nice for him. And same for Mabel. And I would like for her to have a storyline with somebody who isn't necessarily a villain as well. It's fun to see the like, are they a good guy? Are they a bad guy? Whatever. But I'd like a will they, won't they that doesn't have to do with somebody necessarily being a murderer, unless we're once again questioning whether Mabel is the murderer, which I'm open to that.
Hmm. I,
I'm tempted to say my end game before someone steals it, but go ahead, Kate.
I was just gonna, I'm cool with the more romance. I think I'm looking a little more short term. I want them to, I mean, obviously, I want them to catch the murderer and save the building, but I also think I want them to kind of land in a point going into season 6 where they are not regressing, because they have done that in the past where like one step forward, one step back in like the character development, and they've done a lot really well with this season, and I don't want them to like reel it back going into season 6.
Mhm.
um I do want them to kind of lean it, especially for Mabel. I want them to lean into like, no, this is something she likes to do, this is something that she sees herself and realizes she's good at, And I
Mm-hmm.
will say this kind of feeds into my woman of the week. I really love that conversation she had with Detective Williams,
Mm-hmm.
because it is like one of her most clear moments of like, this is something I'm good at, this is something I want, and I'm upset that I can't have it right now. And so I would like for her to be able to achieve a point where she is on her, maybe not fully achieving it, maybe not fully, being a more of a serious detective or anything like that by the end of this season. But I think I would love to see her in season 6, especially leaning more into like, no, I'm not doing this as a hobby anymore. This isn't like a side gig. This is like what I'm doing. This is what
Mm-hmm.
I am, and really leaning into it. I think throughout the show, they've always kind of hinted at. They all know that Mabel's really the only reason that this gets done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think especially this season, they've acknowledged it and they're really leaning into it and they're letting her acknowledge it. And I think that's great. And I would love to see that progress.
Um, my sort of end game for this particular season is simple and neat, and I have no idea, and I'm pretty sure it won't happen, right? But Mabel keeps telling Jay that he needs to actually prove that he's a good guy. He needs to be a good guy, right? So however this murder mystery wraps up, he needs to freaking buy the Arconia and put it in freaking Maple's name so that she can have it. That needs to be if he and I'm not saying that they need a romantic relationship, but that needs to happen if he's going to prove that he's a good dude. So that's what I'd love to freaking see.
I would love that so much. I
Mm.
would love that even if they don't necessarily like continue as a romance. I would love for the Arconio to end up in Mabel's name. That'd be so good. 10 out of 10. Okay, we'll dive into our Woman of the Week. Kate, I have a guess on who yours is. Would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I love Detective Williams. I think every season she comes out like, and she's not in every episode or anything like that, but she does kind of pop up for one or two episodes and delivers both some of the best acting in the show. I think some of the most deadpan comedy in the show. And she drops a lot of like older sister wisdom that Mabel desperately needs sometimes. And I've consistently loved her as a character, but especially in the last two episodes, I
Mm-hmm.
think she was a really great grounding person.
Mm-hmm.
Both, it was really just funny to see her play as like a really effective therapist and just like call things out, but it makes sense because she's a detective. She would definitely notice patterns, notice things about people, and be like, "That's a thing that you need to get fixed."
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also really like the effect she always has on the show. Um, and I like too that she is not a one note, single dimensional character, that she has her own things, her own interests, her own depth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of more said as like this is effort to enrich the world building, to remember I have a family, I have other things.
She has like a
But
wife and
there,
kids that she
yeah,
references. Yeah.
yeah, but I do like that she kind of does get her hands dirty within the group every once in a while. I liked the twist of like she thought she was going to be calling the shots when they went into the gaming hall, and very quickly that like Mabel had to leave because it wasn't going to work. It was too obvious, and that Loretta kind of stole the reins out of her hands. But she realized what was going to like Loretta had it and left without much of a fuss. I think that her ability to recognize others' potential and not always necessarily like be a hype woman, but next like give just like enough of kind of bumpers for people to
Mm-hmm.
really get them going in the right direction and to like let them blossom within who they are. I think that's a really great part of like her character, and it's not often seen or often played really well, and especially played as like a recursive, I'm in every season, I do this every season, I do it really well, but in a very different way every single time. And that's why I love her character so much. I get so excited when she shows up.
She really like enhances the storyline, and this show has such a good sense of like balancing like drama, heart, and comedy, and she's a good representation of one single character who does all of that.
Mhm.
I'll very briefly mention mine because I know we're down to just a minute or two. Building on what we want for Charles and Oliver and some of these characters to be able to access romance at any age, my women of the week are the very hot women of The Golden Bachelor this season. Now, Golden Bachelor season one, everyone was lovely, hot, 10 out of 10. Somehow, some way, they've stepped up their game this season, not in terms of who the Bachelor is, but in terms of who the bachelorettes, the ladies on the show are. They're fantastic. They're varied. There's like some that are like slightly villainy. There's some that are total sweethearts. There's like the cute ones, the hot ones, the this, that, the. They're all accomplished, hilarious, fantastic. It's phenomenal to see, a million times better than the 21-year-old influencer bachelor, and they are all my woman of the week.
Quick and easy. My woman of the week, Asia Wilson, the do everything player for the Las Vegas Aces. They just won the WNBA championship. She was Defensive Player of the Year. She was regular season MVP. She was WNBA Finals MVP. She won the scoring title. She has scored more than 5,000 points. She showed up at the championship parade with Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet because she won basically every award that you can win in the season. So that was awesome and fantastic. And this was supposed to have been a quote unquote regression year for the Aces, and all they did is win their third championship in 4 seasons. So, A'ja Wilson, my woman of the week.
10 out of 10. Love her. And they swept Phoenix in the finals.
I have a 30-second question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you remember when they were talking to Lester Bott, and I forget, I think it was Howard who asked, it was Lester Bott who offered some information, and they said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And Lester Bott says, "Because you didn't ask."
Mm-hmm.
And all I could think to myself is, why doesn't anyone right now ask who freaking killed Lester? Robot might not know, but I figured the next question would be, do you know who did it? And no one asked.
That's a great question. I didn't even think of that, but they should.
I I don't necessarily know if I wanted it like I wanted somebody to ask who killed him because just as like a viewer, that the robot doesn't know. But the entire episode was like, there's a camera. Everybody knows there's a camera on this thing. Of course, why has nobody asked if it has anything to do or pertaining to that night or anything at all? And I'm like like the moment it's been introduced, to be honest, I've been sitting there going, why are we not? Sure, why not? Okay. But especially the Lester episode, I was like, come on, please, somebody.
You guys are thinking advanced of me because I would not have thought to ask. But then again, I am older than the AI generation. That is not my digital native language. Well, we had to skip over what else we watched this week, which in this case would be what else we watched this summer. So, if you'd like to chat with me, Carey, or Kate about what else we watched, read, did, etc. this summer, you can find us on Twitter in the information down below. And we will chat with you all at some point, I believe in November, about the fall television that's going on, including the finale of Only Murders in the Building. Bye.
Bye.